You're finally home. I mean, just imagine hearing those exact words. And not from a roommate, but spoken from the pitch black darkness of your own basement, right after noticing an unexplained draft in your house at 1 in the morning. It is just a chilling, terrifying realization that you are not alone. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to do something a little different. We're dissecting 3 incredibly terrifying firsthand accounts to uncover the actual mechanics of psychological dread. We'll be looking at a pitch black nature park, a completely desolate hospital wing, and a quiet suburban home. Our goal? To understand exactly why certain situations push our minds to the absolute edge. We are literally going to deconstruct true horror. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap. We'll start with the anatomy of a scare, then move into the architecture of isolation, take a look at triggers that escalate tension, and finally, categorize the threats. Let's get to it. Section 1. Anatomy of a scare, the psychological foundation. Now, to truly understand these stories, we have to recognize that true fear, well, it isn't just about cheap jump scares. It is built entirely on psychological dread. We define this as an intense, creeping feeling of apprehension and vulnerability. It's this emotion that gets vastly amplified by being completely isolated and anticipating a threat you just can't quite wrap your head around. We're endlessly fascinated by this feeling because it basically forces our minds to confront the absolute unknown. And as you'll see in our source material, the environment itself plays a massive role in setting the stage for this kind of dread. Moving on to Section 2, the architecture of isolation, stripping safety nets. You know, before a monster, a ghost, or a stalker can strike, the environment itself has to first strip away your safety net. Now, what's really interesting about these 3 vastly different locations is how perfectly they all engineer complete isolation. First, we have Opie Schnabel Park down in San Antonio, pitch black woods at 3 a.m. where the tree canopy totally blocks out the moonlight. Next up, a medium-sized Alabama hospital, specifically the newly remodeled, completely empty 5455 wing at 2 in the morning. And finally, a private suburban home, but it's situated on a quiet, curved street that was specifically designed so no neighbors directly face the house. All 3 of these environments isolate the victims, immediately cutting off any chance for help or witnesses. Just put yourself in the shoes of our second storyteller for a second. He's a 20-year-old pharmacy technician working the night shift. He walks into a hospital wing that's currently under remodel. He says there were no nurses, no patients, just the long, empty hallways. Hospitals are supposed to be these bustling hubs of life and care, right? Well, when you remove the people, the sheer sensory deprivation of that desolate environment creates an immediate, heavy sense of unease. The isolation itself becomes suffocating. So the stage is set. The victims are totally isolated. The safety nets are gone. But what happens when that fragile illusion of safety is just abruptly shattered? What actually turns a quiet, albeit creepy night into a full-blown nightmare? That brings us to Section 3, triggers that escalate tension, the fight or flight spark. Triggers are those specific, undeniable intrusions into our isolated environments that literally force our bodies into a fight or flight response. In our suburban home invasion story, the tension doesn't just spike all at once. It builds incrementally, kind of twisting the knife. It starts on a Friday night with a weird ding-dong ditch, but then at 1 a.m., the doorbell rings twice. Shortly after that, clicking sounds start outside, followed by a knock on the window and a man's voice saying, "I know you're home." Okay, fast forward to the very next night. Our storyteller comes home at 1 a.m. after a Halloween party. She feels a draft. She finds an open window. Then she discovers the basement door, which she knows was shut, is now wide open. The tension just escalates step by step until the inevitable, terrifying climax. Triggers can also be auditory, and honestly, context is absolutely everything. In our first story, an 18-year-old and his friend are out exploring pitch-black woods. Contrast the dead silence of that kind of isolation with what happens next. A soft, rhythmic, perfectly in-cadenced flute begins playing out of nowhere. It even sounded like an Irish jig. Listen, an auditory intrusion like a rhythmic flute in the middle of a dark forest is deeply unnatural. It implies an intelligence, it implies a presence that does not belong there, which makes it vastly more terrifying than just a random roar or an animal noise. Let's move to the hospital story and see how this builds, because this escalation of paranoia is showcased perfectly there. Step 1, the pharmacy tech hears a distinct squeaky door hinge and a heavy crash behind him, but no one's there. Step 2, in a dark room, he spots a figure hunched over a sharps bin, where they throw away used needles. He turns on the light. Nothing. Step 3, he walks past an empty room and sees an old man violently shaking, bleeding from his eyes and mouth, with a heart monitor frantically beeping. He steps back, looks again, and the bed is perfectly clean and empty. His reality is fracturing piece by piece. But sometimes the trigger is horrifying precisely because of what is missing. Back in the park, as the couple tries to flee that bizarre flute music, something massive dashes right in front of them on the trail. The storyteller notes, "I didn't hear it coming and I didn't hear it run away. I only heard the dash right when it was right in front of us." Just the sheer panic of a massive, invisible, completely silent entity crossing your path, it really highlights how the unknown is the absolute ultimate trigger for human terror. Section 4, categorizing the threats. Lurking in the dark. Let's see what we're actually dealing with here. So what exactly was lurking in the dark across these 3 accounts? Well, we can actually extract 3 distinct categories of danger: the supernatural or unknown, the psychological hallucination, and realistic human danger. Each type attacks our fundamental sense of safety in a totally different way. First up, the supernatural or unknown, like we saw in the San Antonio Park story. What makes this so absolutely terrifying is the complete breakdown of physics and logic. The couple found it physically impossible to pinpoint the source of the flute. Then there was that massive shape that produced wind and sound, yet had absolutely no visual silhouette. And honestly, worst of all, when they ran back, the flute sound seemed to just instantly relocate and surround them. They were completely trapped between an invisible physical, dash, and an omnipresent sound. It leaves you with this unresolved, lingering dread of the impossible. Next, we look at what might be the ultimate internal threat: psychological dread and hallucination. Our hospital worker had been awake for a staggering 38 hours. Research he looked up later confirmed that severe sleep deprivation hallucinations typically kick in right around that 30 to 48-hour mark. His mind was literally turning against itself. The horror really peaked when he saw the exact same bleeding, dying old man from earlier, but now he's casually walking onto an elevator wearing a security shirt, smiling, and patting his shoulder. When your own brain is the thing manufacturing the nightmare, there's literally nowhere you can run to escape it. Finally, we have to ground our fears in harsh reality: realistic human danger. So the crucial point here is that sometimes the monster isn't a ghost and it isn't a trick of an exhausted mind. Sometimes it's just a person with malicious intent. In the suburban home story, the victim dealt with a relentless stalker. He tested the waters by knocking on windows and making clicking sounds. And tragically, she was completely failed by dismissive, rude police officers who basically refused to investigate thoroughly. That led directly to the horrifying climax where the stalker successfully invaded her home, opened the basement door, and just waited for her to arrive. These stories absolutely prove that whether a threat defies logic, whether it's born entirely from an exhausted mind, or if it literally breaks through a locked window, the actual mechanics of fear stay the same. The environment isolates us, the triggers spark our panic, and the threat confronts us in the dark. So as we wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you with one final thought to ponder tonight. When you are completely isolated in the dark, which is actually worse, the monsters in your mind or the stranger in your basement?